If you were to speedrun a game for leisure, at what point would you be satisfied with your performance? 1 world record, 2 world records, or maybe just beating your personal best? How much does a world record matter to you, and how long do you want to hold it for? These are all common questions that most runners ask themselves. If there's a point where putting down the controller and moving on is for the best. Some people do just that, getting their 1 world record to say they've got it and then moving right along. But for others, this isn't enough. And that constant grind to stay on top is their leisure. Pushing the boundaries of what a game can even handle, stretching bugs and glitches to their absolute limit, just to keep that first place position. And no game exemplifies this as well as LEGO Batman 1. While the world record history isn't as expansive as a game like LEGO Star Wars, it still has its own story to tell. One of high highs and low lows, victory and defeat. So let's not delay any longer as we cover the world record history of LEGO Batman 1 the video game, any percent hero mode.
Good fight! Yes! I think that's a true world record now, by 1 second.
Sub 57, 56:45, dude.
No!
Just like any other game, LEGO Batman is split into a multitude of different categories, and I'll be choosing to focus on the most popular one, the any percent hero story mode. Originally, I was going to cover the full game any percent, but the history and the time saves of that category aren't nearly as interesting to me as the standalone hero mode. So where does our story begin? Well, judging by the world record progression graph on speedrun.com, the first official run of the game that hasn't been unsubmitted was from a runner named Tyrene on May 7th of 2015, clocking in at a time of 1 hour, 35 minutes, and 48 seconds. Unfortunately, Tyrene has removed all of his recorded VODs from his Twitch, so we'll be unable to reference the exact strategies or tricks used. What we can use, however, are 2 things. Number 1 is this all episodes run from a runner named Prince, who told me that it should have included a majority of the early tricks they were using. And number 2 is the description submitted with the run itself. In this first run, the description reads, "Batboat battle cost me a lot of time. Wish I had a RAM disk/SSD, my load times suck." With there only being 15 levels to play through, I'm confident that this run didn't take advantage of too many exploits. Judging by Prince's run, we can assume that Tyrene did this Robin jump in 2-1.
There we go.
This sick looking slide in 2-3.
There we go.
This wall clip in 2-4.
Here, Robin. There we go. Clip through the wall.
Another cool slide in 2-5.
There we go.
A couple of wall jumps in 3-1.
Alright, so I would need another skip for this. So I'll just wall jump up there.
And this crazy wall jump in 3-4.
Alright, here's another big skip.
Tyrene would then beat his own record by 48 seconds 13 days later, bringing it down to an even 1 hour and 35 minutes. which was most likely due to better execution of whatever tricks he may have been using. This record would stand for roughly 3 months before another player by the username Kimi would enter the scene, beating the 135 set by Tyrene by 50 seconds on August 24th of 2015, which is once again mostly due to more solid execution of the tricks present. In the notes for this run, Kimi actually gives us quite a lot of insight. For one, we know Kimi made some major mistakes in level 1-1, 1-3, 2-1, 2-3, 2-5, 3-3, and 3-4, while saving lots of time in levels 1-2, 1-5, and 3-1. This small bit of information lets us know that across the board, runners of this game were experiencing similar time losses, especially in the vehicle levels and during a few of the game's boss fights. After yet another record trade back to Tyrene at a time of 1:32:38 on August 28th, Kimi would once again steal it back, and this time for good, with our final non-video entry sitting at a time of 1 hour, 27 minutes, and 34 seconds on September 11th of 2015, the first sub 1.5 hour run ever. While again, there are no videos for these previously mentioned runs, we do have some splits we can look at from Kimi to see where a lot of the time save was made up. Comparing this 127 to the previous 134, we see a 46-second improvement in 2-1, a 62-second improvement in 3-1, a 1 minute and 23-second improvement in 3-2, a 1 minute and 7-second improvement in 3-3, and a 1 minute and 6-second time save in 3-5. This run for the time was quite frankly insane. For your next PB to make over minute-long time saves in multiple levels in a row was nearly unheard of, and solidified Kimi as one of the most impressive runners in the scene, and of course they wouldn't disappoint. 2 months later, on November 20th, we would see our first world record with video, done by none other than Kimi, with a time of 1 hour, 26 minutes, and 57 seconds. This run was and still is incredible, nailing some difficult jumps first try, and overall optimizing every small detail of the route. For example, in 1-3, keeping Two-Face's car as close as possible to the bat signal to make each cycle take mere seconds. Or take this jump to build the tractor early in 2-4, which along with nailing the build clip was able to save 52 seconds over the previous PB. All in all, while there were some minor mistakes, without the discovery of some new skips or bugs, this run was sure to stand the test of time. Someone would need to do every single thing that Kimi did and faster to take this record away. That's not to say that tons of time save wasn't possible, just very difficult. If that didn't sound unlikely enough, Kimi came back 7 months later uninterrupted with an 8-second time save over the last record, with some better execution across the board. Kimi had held the record in this game for longer than anyone. 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 20 months, 2 years. It seemed like there was nothing that could be done to usurp this performance. That was until September 27th of 2017, when something big would change. 2 years and 16 days after Kimi's world record reclamation, it was beaten by 41 seconds. Kimi would not come back to post any world record attempts after they lost this one. It's time we talk about the reign of the prince, or rather, princed. A 1:26:08. How was this possible? By a brand new record holder? Was some kind of new skip discovered? Well, not exactly. 40 seconds, while still a big save, was not big enough to say something major was found. Prince had just perfected the route set in place by Kimi. In 2-2 under the city, for example, Prince landed nearly every single jump first try, gaining a huge lead on Kimi, as well as a new way to get past this tank you previously slid across. It was small saves like these that, across the board, earned Prince the 40-second record they deserved. On top of this, Prince would go on to set a 1:23:58 in November, shaving off around 2 minutes of time thanks to some new jumps being discovered in 2-1 to save time during the Catwoman fight, and doing a first try cutscene skip in 3-3 by carefully flying up and down after the billboard to skip the trigger. The funny thing about this 1:23 run is that a lot of the individual level splits were timed as slower than the 1:26 run, but the made-up time was so strong it still set a record, which proved that a sub 1:20 run could be closer than we thought. And Prince seemed to notice the same thing, as the next record to be set was a 1:17:10 on January 21st of 2018. And nothing can summarize this run better than Prince himself can.
That was just such a good run.
Wow, that was a good run. I mean, what's there to say? A deathless 1-2, a faster 1-3 that sets up car deaths more efficiently, a zero-cycle Catwoman fight that uses precisely timed punches, a zero-death 3-4 with a first-try wall jump. It really was another stunning performance. Every time I watched back these runs, I thought to myself, how can they even optimize this more? But it just kept getting better. Sure, there were some smaller things being found that saved a couple of seconds, some new tight jumps here and there, but it truly seemed that every record being set was going to be nigh unbeatable. This run proved that not only a sub 1:20 was real, but that a sub 1:15 wasn't far behind. 4 months later, on May 5th, Prince would set a 1:16:44 with some minor improvements, but still not the sub 1:15 the community was looking for. This was in part due to a couple of time saves found in 3-1, which allow for nearly half of room 3 to be bypassed. While the hunt for 1:15 was happening, a new record holder entered the mix named the Gloth, who set a 1:15:43 just 7 days after Prince's last record. Not the sub 1:15, but still a vast improvement. This run was on the right track, saving over a minute of time in 2-1, doing something known as an extended glide or extended flight. Glide extensions are done by repeatedly canceling and restarting your glide just about every second, which allows for Batman to fly further than intended. And this small exploit would help break open multiple parts of this run. Normally in 2-1, you have to tag team as Batman and Robin, building bridges, walking up metal grates, and blowing things up to reach a trapdoor on the other side of the buildings. However, using some very carefully placed e-glides from the rooftops, you can actually skip over every puzzle in this level. It's also worth noting that Gloth took a very unorthodox approach to the order of levels when running, opting to do all of episode 1, then 3, then 2. This was the smarter strategy in the end, since 3-1 was one of the technically hardest levels at the time, with multiple tricky jumps back to back. Putting this level earlier in the run would lead to faster resets overall if something was messed up. All that was left to do now was see who would break the 1:15 barrier, and we wouldn't have to wait long, as just 2 days later, Prince would submit a 1:11 to the leaderboard. This surprised a lot of people, including Prince, as this run's description reads, "Guess I'll just skip on down to 1:11. But the question on everyone's mind was how? Prince didn't opt to go in the safer 1-3-2 order as Gloth did, and instead kept to the standard 1-2-3. His 1-1 was fast, but still relatively normal, and the same goes for the rest of episode 1. In episode 2, specifically 2-3, Prince is able to use an e-glide to skip over the water puzzle in the stairs room, then get an early entrance to the croc fight. In 3-1, some new setups allow for a cleaner room 3, as well as a pretty solid boss fight all around. In 3-2, a new wall jumping route was discovered called Candy Cane Skip, which allowed players to skip using the vacuum suit as Robin. This trick involved wall jumping off of some invisible barriers to land on top of this building, then carefully jumping off onto a candy cane, then to your destination. Very difficult, but a huge time save. In 3-3, Prince got an insane Scarecrow fight, taking him down in seconds before he had a chance to run. And in 3-5, some new Robin wall jumps took the time down by about 15 seconds. For the first sub 115 route to beat the previous by almost 4 minutes, it was a grand achievement, especially with the first try Candy Cane Skip and a flawless Scarecrow. However, the run still wasn't perfect. There were still some strategies missing from this record, most notably a small cutscene skip in 3-4 that no world record attempt had been able to hit just yet, but we'll come back to that later. Prince would then take his 111 down to a 1:10:51 just 7 months later on December 2nd, through once again a more well-executed run using the same route up until 2-1. The strategy before this 110 was to build the magnet suit, climb up the very slow metal slope, jump onto the tightrope, and then jump up top. With that route, this first room would take you roughly 46 seconds. But something new had been found, and similar to Candy Cane Skip, it involves Robin's wall jump. If you jump onto this very thinly modeled fence, you could wall jump off the side of this windowsill onto the neighboring windowsill, all the way up to the lever. This takes you around 27 seconds if done perfectly, saving you nearly 20 seconds overall. 9 days later, Gloth would come back with a near 20-second improvement over that, with a more well-executed 2-1 overall. Big milestones like this or Prince's 111 were standing for notably long periods of time, and seemed to be only beaten by the same individual who set the record. If this trend was to keep up, then the speedrunning scene for LB1 would surely calm down, possibly even fizzle out. It's only natural for runners to want to move on to new things when they believe they've offered all that they can to a game and its community. February 15th, 2019, 1:08:08. Another 2-minute time save by Prince. The first record of the new year. He was unstoppable, continually setting groundbreaking record after record, and this wasn't a simple case of just doing the trick better, even though he did that as well. He got the metal suit skip in 2-1, along with the E-glides.
The magnet suit with a little tricky wall jump there. So where I bob up and down like that while I'm flying, it's very, very useful.
In 3-1, he discovered you can skip the entire 30-second long process of vacuuming things up as Robin by doing an E-glide around this wall and building the gears with iframes in the goop. He nailed both the water wall jump and candy cane jump in 3-2 first try as well.
That's a huge sigh of relief.
And not to mention, after every single record missing it, he got the cutscene skip in 3-4, as well as implementing new jumping strategies to skip building a zipline in the next room over. In the same level again, getting another skip that allows for this wall to be broken early. 3-5 also had a slight improvement with an out-of-bounds skip saving tons of time on the interior of the cathedral. All of these strategies added up to be a brand new record. It's very uncommon for a game to be making huge jumps in time like this without a more widely applicable trick being found that can be used at multiple points in the run. An example of this would have been Robin's wall jump taking players to places they aren't supposed to be, like with the fire wall jump in 3-4, the candy cane jump in 3-2, and most recently the windowsill skip in 2-1. So what was so different about this 108? Well, it's time we talk about something called 1P2C, or One Player, Two Controllers. Although this category is called solo, the use of two controllers isn't necessarily banned, it just can't be being played by two different people. While this had been used in a couple runs previous, it had not been used in a world record run, making this run one of the first times it shows its true worth. In this 108, it was only used on two occasions. Once in the beginning of 1-2 to multitask while wall climbing, and once in 3-5 to make sure Batman was where he needed to be. It was worth noting that this 1P2C was banned up until March of 2018, so most of our runs going forward are going to be using this strategy for exploits and efficiency. It shouldn't need to be said, but this is insanely hard to do. Whether a runner plays with their feet, teeth, or hands, it is a brain teaser to try and get 1P2C to work properly, which is why its uses are very limited in the time of this 108. It would take tons of future optimizations before 1P2C was really going to be ready to show off. But rest assured, runners were practicing, but some a bit harder than others. 6.5 minutes, the second biggest time save we've had in this game yet. And it was by beating his own record. What a flex. How do you even save 6.5 minutes? Well, by being an absolute gamer. In 1-5, Prince takes the police car to the cliffside and jumps over the wall to press the lever early instead of having to build the metal suit. In 3-3, Prince smuggles torpedoes through the loading zone to get an extra quick kill on Scarecrow, as well as some extremely expert maneuvering in Room 3. And in 3-5, he overlaps a few of his tasks using 1P2C to shave a couple of seconds off. Now, I may have lied just a little bit about how saving 6.5 minutes is solely by pure gamer skill, because there were record-setting runs between this one and the last that we talked about, but they're no longer on the leaderboard, and as far as I'm aware, no longer exist. I first realized this when at the end of the 101, Prince ends off the recording by saying it's only a world record by about a second.
Yes. I think that's a true world record now. By 1 second.
And after DMing him, he told me a runner by the name of Waylon would regularly remove their runs from the leaderboard, so there probably were some strats implemented by Waylon before anybody else, but we're only just now seeing them as a result of Waylon deleting his runs. Either way, we have to act like these runs don't exist, and try as I might searching on the Wayback Machine, I have to find time to finish this video. So here's the deal so far. The LB1 community has taken this category's record down by over half an hour in the last 4 years, with the most recent record being set at a 101.18 by Prince 3 days after the 101.36. There was a lot of tension in the air. Forget a sub 130 or a sub 115, there was a very real possibility that somebody could lower the record below a 1 hour time. And it's someone I've mentioned in this video already. Why don't you take a guess in the comments down below before we fully move on? Sub 1 hour was a huge deal, and of course nobody saw it as impossible. With the recent legalization of 1P2C, e-gliding, and wall jumps, somebody was bound to either find a new trick that saves a ton of time or perform a borderline perfect run with the pre-existing tricks. And, well, it wouldn't take very long. 19 days after the 101.18, a time of 59 minutes and 54 seconds, 6 mere seconds past a sub 1, would be completed by none other than Waylon. Now, it may not look like Waylon was deserving of this title. We haven't seen a single run of theirs just yet. From what it looks like, Gloth and Prince should have been in the runnings for this sub 1 against each other, but that's where you'd be wrong. If Waylon hadn't removed any of his runs from the leaderboard, he may have honestly looked like a more likely candidate than Prince himself. But again, we'll never know. Enough about that though. What about the run? Where did the time save come from? Well, it's quite simple. In order to have the fastest time, you just have to remove your video so that you spend no time in the game at all. Yeah, much like the early world records of 2015, nearly all of Waylon's video attempts are gone, save for just one, which we'll touch on later. This not only sucks because it's historical, but also because he made some pretty drastic improvements over the previous runs, and we'll never be able to know where those strategies were born. There also seem to be no notes or splits on any of these submissions. From that 59.54, Waylon would go on to set a 58.02 on November 11th of 2019, marking another significant drop in time. Again, no video to accompany this, so all we can do is move on. Surprisingly, our next record comes from yet another first-time record holder in this game, Guildmaster TV, at an incredible 56.54, an unprecedented time save within the sub-hour era, and with video, might I add. Accompanying this submission is the description: I have finally taken down Waylon Wilt. 53 minutes is possible. Seeing as this is our first run in a few world records with video, we have a lot to cover. Before we begin, let's talk about two main things: stud collection and FDT. Stud collection is quite simple. At the end of each level, the game will give you a mini walkthrough of what you need to do in each level to classify a 100% completion goal. For example, it displays the mini-kits you collected, how close you were to superhero, and if you got the red brick or not. In level 1-1, you aren't able to skip past these prompts, since the game assumes this is your first time seeing it and deems it as important. This means you want to leave the level with the least amount of studs possible, so the game spends less time tallying up your superhero total. This only applies to level 1, as future level menus can be skipped. In this split by guild, we see him jumping off the edge before putting Clayface in jail, which overall saves him a ton of time in the last menu. Now the next trick might take some more explaining. Previous to this run, FDT or frame rate dependent tricks were not allowed. What is a frame rate dependent trick? I'll give you the abridged definition. When your frame count either gets too high or too low in the earlier LEGO games, weird things begin to happen. This is because a lot of the game's physics are tied to your frame count. As your frames go up, for example, your jump height gets lowered, among other things. Frame rate equals physics. When you mess with the very foundation of the game's frames, some things don't follow along properly. Now, because certain FDT varies between different quality of equipment, there is a varying level of success with the trick. The most common way to achieve FDT is to either repeatedly alt-tab your game to create artificial lag, or to toggle off VSync to allow your frames to go uncapped. When FDT was introduced, some runners didn't like the idea of it being used since it felt cheap. Thus, the FDT tag was created to help separate the two variations. For consistency's sake, we'll be reviewing every world record, regardless of the tag or not. What sort of FDT does LEGO Batman have? We'll talk about that when we get there. In 1.2, we see a new 1P2C strategy called a drop-in warp. Those of you who have watched the LEGO Indiana Jones video I made not too long ago will know what I'm talking about. Drop-in warps are abusing the game's checkpoint system for entering in player 2 by manipulating the camera and player 1's position to spawn the second player in places they shouldn't be. By wall jumping up the snowman, you can spawn player 2 behind the door, bypassing the need for the snowman puzzle. In the next room, you can do something known as a BRC, or batarang clip, to skip walking up the slow metal platform. If you hold down the target button to throw a batarang, your character's position gets skewed, and the game will warp you straight upwards. I told you we have a lot to talk about. In 1-3, Guild does another drop-in warp to skip room 2 by dropping in Robin at the top corner and navigating back towards the loading zone. 1-5 has yet another drop-in warp at the beginning to skip the car checkpoint, and another to get Robin across the metal wall. Then we see our first noticeable FDT of the run, something called a punch launch. Using Robin, you can punch against this wall with VSync toggled off, and you will just ride straight up. This can only be done on very specific terrain, so it's not as applicable as you may think. 3-1 has some small new Hatter strats that involve small cutscene skips, and 3-2 has a new candy cane setup using FDT punch launches. Now remember that 3-4 cutscene skip that Prince was fiending for? Turns out if you turn VSync off, Killer Moth just does this. Batman doesn't kill. Speaking of 3-4, this new drop-in warp changes the way Room 2 progresses, as well as a BRC to end it all off. 2-1 has a new Catwoman skip that involves pushing her off the bridge and hoping that cats don't always land on their feet. Once again, I told you there was a lot to cover. Either way, this run really started to show where the cracks were forming in this game, and we hadn't even gone off the deep end with them. Yet. Despite this run beating a record that had stood for half a year, it was beaten in just 3 days by Waylon by around 2 full minutes. But of course, without video to reference or splits to compare, there isn't much to say. Waylon's new 54-minute time stood for 2 months uncontested, but of course there was someone to take it right back. As revenge for swiping the first sub-hour from under his nose, Prince returned with a 53-29 on his second run back from break. There isn't much to cover about this run that hasn't already been said. A very quick 3-1 with near perfect E-glides helped save some time, along with an amazing 3-5. The strategies and setups used were very similar to the 56-minute time set by Guildmaster. On the topic of Guildmaster, on August 4th of 2020 and August 6th of 2020, he would go on to set 2 new records, a 52.08 and a 51.55 with the same route as previous. Runners were getting more comfortable with their FDTs and therefore performing their runs better. It was at this point that everyone was once again waiting with bated breath for a sub-50 time. And the 2 most likely contenders at this point were Waylon and Guild, the 2 titans who have been battling it out in the sub-1 hour era. It was only a matter of time before one of them pushed the other further than we ever thought possible back in 2015. That tension would last for over 3 months, as runs came close but just fell short of Guild's 51.55. That wasn't until November 12th of 2020, when Guild would beat his own previous world record by over 2 minutes, with a 49.40. We had reached the point in this game's lifespan where tricks were being done first try nearly every time. To put it in perspective, a lot of these runners had been doing the same tricks over and over for just under 5 years. So this sub-50 wasn't going to be achieved by just doing the trick better. It would instead come packaged with some new time saves. In 1-1, a new BRC was discovered. If you wall jump up the side of this building, then land on the dispenser, you could skip building the tech suit and controlling the vehicle a near 15-second save. In 3-2, you could use 1P2C to speed up the Harley fight by quite a bit. In 2-3, a swap warp was discovered that lets you skip the first area accompanied by an out-of-bounds jump that puts you in the loading transition. In the next room, you could do a BRC to upwarp into the glide suit, then BRC again to skip backtracking for the other suit. These skips, while sparse, added up to be a lot of time save. The description of this run reads: Sub 50 has always been that aspiration, but now that I've got it, I'm not satisfied knowing the possibilities still. Now, believe it or not, this isn't where our story ends. There is still one more milestone we need to talk about. And just like the rest of our arcs, it starts with a brand new record by a brand new runner. Note KO on December 13th. Ultimately, this run uses the same strategy as the last, just with better handling over the menus and 1P2C, but it marks a serious turning point in the progression of this game. Seeing the time lower and lower, we have to ask, is a sub 45-minute run possible? 7 months later, on July 7th, Waylon would ask the same question, submitting a 14-second improvement over Note, with the strategies still being the same. This was the longest we had gone without a new skip or strategy being found in a new world record submission. And it was looking less and less likely that someone would find something to take this game down to the next level. 8 days later, Noteco would steal his run back from Waylon with a 47.51 in a run that I like to call BRC Central. In 1-3, a new upwarp was discovered that skips the entire room. In 3-1, a BRC was found that saves time over gliding around the full room. The same thing was also discovered in 3-2 to skip the initial detonation. And again in 3-4 in the first room. As well as the third room to skip the wall jumps. And yet another BRC was used in 2-4 to skip building the bulldozer, saving seconds but still valuable time. Note was proving themselves a formidable force, one that could stand up to the record holders of the past. This being backed up by the fact that this 47.51 stood uncontested for half a year. But there was another up-and-coming runner, someone that would, ironically, take his first record from Note with almost the same amount of improvement that Note had first used to take his record from Guild. This runner's name was Skinner. Skinner broke into the scene with the first sub 2 you can bank on Batman in any world record run yet. And while impressive as that is by itself, he wouldn't slow down there. A flawless 1-2, a first try upwarp in 1-4, you get the idea. It was a formidable run, but not impossible to beat, because 2 days later, Skinner would beat his own record with a time of 46.46, citing godlike vehicle levels as the main reason why. As the time inched closer and closer to sub 45 minutes, people began wondering what and who would push it to that point. If we compare sub 45 to sub hour, it would take maybe 3 or 4 more records to lower it down. And even if it was possible, would any new tricks be needed, or could general practice be the catalyst? All that and more would be answered 3 months later, when not 2, not 3, not 4, or even 5 new records had passed, but one single new submission. A 44-minute, 43-second run on April 15th of 2022 by none other than Note. Let's take a look at the current gold standard for all LB1 runs in the current day. Using all the previous strats we've discussed, we can add a couple new ones, like this clip in 1-3 that skips the vacuum section. A new drop-in warp skips the first Two-Face fight in 1-5, and another drop-in warp in 3-2 allows Batman to clip beneath the floor and skip the pre-Harley fight puzzles. And quite possibly the biggest improvement comes in 3-5, where a BRC out of bounds accompanied by an E-glide straight across lets you trigger the ending cutscene of this level without ever fighting the boss. We also get our first successful attempt at stair skip in 2-3, which involves E-gliding off of the broken pillar to the other side. And this is where the record stands today, but it will be broken. The question is more so, by who? A new runner? An old runner ready for redemption? Or maybe a series of runs without video? Only time can tell. It seems to me that we covered every milestone as it happened, but for some reason, if that isn't the case, I'll make sure to keep those interested updated in my Discord, which you can find down below along with links to everything else. Thank you all for watching, I've been BD1P, and I'll see you in the next video.